I have recently had the pleasure of sitting through the last season and a half of Beastars with my boyfriend Danny. Now, I'd heard plenty of things about this anime prior, mostly from the first season, and from what I'd seen, the internet seems to have mostly positive opinions on it. About a year and a half ago, I watched the first half of season 1, and at that point the story hadn't progressed much beyond a high school drama with an interesting take on the dynamics of animals coexisting in a society with herbivores and carnivores. Sort of like Zootopia, but much more visceral. Now, high school dramas aren't exactly my cup of tea when it comes to what I enjoy watching, but I still found the anime to be well made. The unique art style and musical score are full of personality that helps to complement the show, and Legoshi, our main protagonist, is beyond lovable as we get to see his socially awkward self struggling to deal with his feelings for a rabbit he nearly ate alive at the beginning of the show. Side note, I think this should go without saying, but there's going to be plenty of spoilers here as the video continues. If you've yet to see the anime, come back to this video once you've seen it all. Unless you don't care about spoilers, I suppose? As I mentioned, I had only seen half of Season 1 before putting Beastars on the back shelf, and hadn't given it much thought since. However, that all changed when I started hearing the war stories from Danny. After the Season 2 dub was released on Netflix, Danny, being the furry degenerate he is, I'm sorry Danny, I love you, watched it in full. And boy fucking howdy did he have some interesting things to say about it. I'll leave the specifics for later, but needless to say, I was perturbed, and unfortunately for me, I can't help but get morbidly curious about these sorts of things. Flash forward a week, and I was finally willing to give in to those curiosities and watch the remaining season and a half of Beastars with my boy, much to his delight. And what I saw was bizarre, to say the least. Several times throughout the second season, I found myself wondering if the entire story was just a massive bait and switch. It starts off as a high school drama murder mystery, but by the end of the first season we've got a black market crime syndicate kidnapping fiasco. This is all fine and dandy, but the story just can't seem to tie all these things together in a way that's meaningful. Sure, Juno is adorable, and the whole love triangle with her, Haru, and Leg is amusing to watch, but how the fuck am I meant to focus or care about that at all when by the end of Season 2, the stakes have been raised so far beyond that subplot that I can't even remember Juno doing anything significant in the story after the halfway mark in the second season. This of course leads to one of my main issues with the series. It has a Rise of Skywalker level of dropped plot points that just don't get resolved. Take the drama club being shut down. We have an admittedly charming scene between Bill and Els, where Bill acts accepting of the school segregation and end of the club, but Els confronts him and demands how Bill can act so indifferent about it. Taken aback, Bill drops the act and states that they should do everything they can to keep the club alive. And it's nice because, despite everyone in the show claiming that he's a nice person, all that we've really seen of him so far is this asshole that just wants to fuck people. And it's nice to see this character development where he grows and changes for the better. And then they never even discuss this again. Yes, I'm aware that a third season is all but confirmed by Studio Orange and Netflix back in July, I believe, and I hope they'll have ample opportunity to try and revisit some of these issues, but there's still a fundamental problem. The anime spends so much time focusing on anything but school drama in its second season. Leg briefly touches on how training at night with Goheen has his grades dropping, but other than that, school is really just an excuse for these characters to bump into each other. It's abhorrently obvious that the writers wanted to shift their focus away from the school drama and lean hard into the crime and instinctual urges aspect of the show. More on that later. So how am I supposed to care about a damn drama club being shut down when the story's conflict now revolves around taking down a giant bear murderer who's a threat to the school's safety? There's nothing inherently wrong with having multiple plot lines running simultaneously. In fact, pulling off such a thing in a satisfying and concise manner is one of the best things you can do to keep your audience engaged and on their toes while they're exposed to a variety of different settings, characters, and subplots all relevant to the overarching story. Keyword, relevant. You need these plotlines to have some sort of payoff for them to work, but you simply don't get that as much in Beastars. There's a lack of reasoning at several points in this story that has me honestly wondering if the original idea for this series was based off a damn roleplay between two people that had a fetish for being eaten alive. In the second episode, The Grey Police Hound Runs, by the way, who the hell is coming up with these titles? We have two things happening. We have a meeting between these school headmasters. This mouse guy has the absolutely fucking brilliant idea that because Cherryton hasn't produced a Beastar, they should have the students, not the police, find Tem's murderer. Excuse me, what the fuck? They have police in this world. The little mouse dude acknowledges it in this scene. He says that the police say it's highly unlikely the murderer wasn't a student. If the police concluded that much, why the hell aren't we seeing more of them? Did they just say, fuck it, and stop investigating after that point? Are they not allowed on school grounds? Later in that season, even Deerboy and Goheen tell Leg that he could just call the police instead of fighting Riz himself. Why would you have high school students investigating a fucking murderer? The mouse guy points out how dangerous it is for the students to remain in the school if they could be devoured at any moment, yet he's perfectly fine with the dangers of sending these students after that murderer themselves. In the Japanese translation, the mouse's words are put as the student who pins down the perpetrator should be the next Beastar. I don't speak Japanese, so to me it's unclear if that means figuratively pinning down the murderer by deducing who the murderer is and turning them in, or literally pinning them down and capturing them. It's even worse in the English dub, where it's worded as whichever student captures the perpetrator. I find it hilarious that this tiny little mouse, who literally needs a megaphone to be able to speak loud enough at this meeting, is the one suggesting a bunch of high school students should be the one to go out and capture a goddamn murderous carnivore. What the actual fuck? But wait, there's more. Intercut between this meeting, we have Leg getting his first glance of none other than Snake Lady. She's called Six Eyes in the anime, but I honestly don't even know if that counts as a name. Yeah, she has these patterns on her scales that look like eyes and were the reason for her rip-off Pride from Fullmetal Alchemist look at the beginning, but they're never really explained to be anything more than patterns. Revealed to be the cause behind the apparent ghost sightings among high school students, Snake Lady is a 50-foot rattlesnake with a discount JoJo hat, and is apparently the only security guard at Cherryton High. This just raises so many questions for me. One, how the fuck do you hide someone like that? She's the largest creature we've seen in this entire series, but we haven't even been alluded to her presence until now. This is some Chamber of Secrets level shit. How the hell does a massive snake creature roam around the school while simultaneously keeping watch over everyone, yet remaining completely hidden? And why do they even want her to be hidden in the first place? So she might catch troublemakers in the act? Why not have her patrolling the damn hallways in full view? I wouldn't even risk chewing a piece of gum at this place if it was against the rules and I knew they had a massive venomous snake enforcing the rules here. Just why? She's apparently just a plot device to set Leg on the path of finding the murderer, because she's never seen again after Leg agrees to do so. But honestly, throughout both seasons, we see Leg demonstrating an incredible amount of compassion. His desire to use his strength to protect the herbivores and keep his friends safe is his defining trait. Why not just use that as his reasoning to be self-motivated and find Tem's killer? He's been shown time and time again to be altruistic and doesn't want to live in a world where herbivores fear carnivores. Wouldn't that be enough for him to want to find the killer and prevent any more devourings? Why do we need some random-ass snake lady who never showed up again? Oh, right. They wanted to appeal to the crowd that didn't get enough snake love and coiling kink in the first season. I know that sounds dumb, but I honestly think that's got a lot to do with it. The writers put an unsettling amount of work into trying to sexualize and fetishize everything about this series, and this scene is particularly bad about it. Snake Lady starts talking about how Leg got all riled up on stage with Bill last season because Haru's childlike face turns him on? What the fuck? In the Japanese translation, she even goes as far as to call him a pedophile. Legoshi is literally younger than Haru by a year. What the hell am I watching? What's even worse is that not only does Snake Lady have a completely misguided reasoning for thinking Leg is fucked up in the head, but that also turns her on apparently. That and her creepy fascination with his sexy limbs, I guess. And this is her idea of the best candidate for finding the killer. We actually do get an explanation for why we haven't seen her at least. Snake Lady says she's hiding because she's ashamed of not having limbs, but why is that a thing? You're a snake. Are snakes just looked down upon for not having limbs? Okay. Anyway, Leg, being his compassionate self, starts sympathizing with Snake Lady after hearing this, and that's enough to get Six Eyes so hot and bothered she immediately drops Leg and slithers away out of embarrassment. Great. There's so much weirdness going on here that I was practically in shock watching it. Not only are the police not investigating the murder, the school security guard, who might I remind you is a 50-foot rattlesnake that would have no problem taking down Riz herself, is content to sit back and let Leg do her job for her. Of course, Leg eventually decides to take up her offer and find the murderer because he wants to take responsibility for his strength like Louis told him to in Season 1. I find it funny that he's saying that to a giant snake that, again, would have no problem taking down the killer if she'd take responsibility for her strength instead. That and, do her job. She gives some vague-ass prompt about the first clue being within leg, whatever that means. So then we go to see what's up with Louis. Remember how he shot Mafia leader Lion Guy and said he wanted to be eaten in Season 1? Well, apparently he's the leader of the Shishigumi now. How and why, you might ask? Well, simple. After seeing their boss was shot dead by a high schooler, the rest of the Shishigumi, instead of immediately shooting Louis or eating him like he clearly wants, they decide that they should make Louis their new boss because it'll make them look better in the eyes of a world that advocates for herbivores? You're a crime organization. You don't need to be acting like you need to keep up public relations. The first season set the Shishigumi up like they ruled through fear, so much so that everyone in the black market was freaked out when Leg started asking about them. Of course, the apparently terrifying Shishigumi Mafia was still beaten by a high schooler wolf with a panda friend who shot them with grass, so why they're at all feared anymore is still a mystery to me. Would word not get out about that? Did no one question how the previous boss died? Who the hell would respect or fear a crime syndicate after finding out a goddamn high school student was the one to kill their old boss? And they have the gall to be offering protection to black market businesses as a service. I mean, Louis fits the role as a mafia leader well enough, and it's entertaining to see him in this situation, but the circumstances that brought about this situation just don't make any sense to me. Anyway, Louis realizes that the Lions want to make him their boss instead of eat him, and rather than accept it, he tries to shoot himself. Okay. But he's prevented from doing so by one of the Lions. It's incredibly vague and we don't get anything more than a gunshot and a bullet case flying through the air. Louis wakes up with no apparent injuries later on, so I don't know exactly what caused him to black out in the first place, and it's never really explained. Also, I couldn't help but laugh after realizing that this was the third gunshot to be fired on that balcony. And last season we saw that Leg and Haru were walking away together. They couldn't have been more than 100 yards away when the first two shots went off, and probably not much further when the third, Louis' attempted suicide, went off as well. Yet they never hear it. The sound designers put an incredible amount of work into making the gunshots sound cool as hell. They sound more like 50 caliber sniper rifles going off than a small handgun, which is fine, except for the fact that Leg and Haru should have definitely heard it, turned around, and seen Louis. But that's besides the point. After falling unconscious due to mysterious means, Louis wakes up at a dinner table with the Lions. He's given a piece of meat and told that he can either eat it and become the leader of the Shishigumi, or not eat it and be devoured. Yet he's acting like neither are a good option. I'm sorry, but isn't the latter the exact same thing you were telling them to do 2 minutes ago? You were so set on having them eat you that you would have rather killed yourself than not be eaten. Were you just letting your devouring fetish get the best of you on the balcony? Why are you only now coming to your senses, you half-baked deer fuck? He ends up eating the meat and becomes the mafia leader anyway, so now that's a thing. Again, I like him in the role, it's oddly fitting, but the reason why he's there is just absurd. Meanwhile, Leg has to find out who murdered Tem because the police are too busy eating donuts and Snake Lady is too ashamed of her body to do her job. So he starts asking around, seeing if Tem had enemies, what his close friends knew, yada yada. This ends up coming back to bite him when the murderer pays Leg a visit and beats the crap out of him to get him to back down on his investigation. Leg is immediately knocked out before he knows what's happening and wakes up with a blindfold on and his hands bound. Inconveniently, he's had a cold and can't smell anything, so he can't get any idea what the attacker looks like or smells like. So, the next logical choice is to start French kissing his assailant, of course, which he does. Leg literally starts tasting the inside of the murderer's mouth and memorizes the taste to help him reveal their identity later. No, I'm not kidding. He didn't think at all to try and taste maybe some bit of fur, or at least try and yank out some fur and stuff it in his pocket to smell it later when his nose clears up. No, Leg is a go big or go home kind of guy. Regardless, he gets the shit beaten out of him and nearly dies. Later he realizes how impossible it will be for him to take on the killer, so he goes to Goheen for training and spends his nights learning how to resist the temptation of eating meat. Meanwhile, a cage dancer is almost eaten alive, and Louis is told to eat his veggies by his new lion daddy. Another episode later, and we're properly introduced to Louis' actual father. I don't want to say much about this scene because I get the feeling this character is someone who's going to be explored more in depth in later seasons, but Louis holds his own father at gunpoint and demands that he signs a paper for withdrawal from school, though it's unclear why he needs this. Louis, you're running a goddamn crime syndicate. You don't need Daddy's permission to leave school. Why on earth are you worried about getting in trouble for not going to school when you've stated that the black market is your home now? Louis' dad eventually signs it regardless, and we go back to see what Leg's up to. He decides to start looking into Juno's mouth for reasons, and she reacts exactly how you'd expect her to react, with her senpai apparently getting handsy. Of course, Leg isn't flirting with her, he just needed to see what their bite ratios were, though we don't know why he needed this. Perhaps it was to help with his training with Goheen, or helping deduce the killer? Guess we'll never know, but at least this scene was guaranteed to procure some fan art of a particular variety. Leg then decides to bury some chunks of meat he was training with after tracking down who they were in life. It's an interesting scene and an actually pretty believable way for Legoshi to overcome his instincts by accepting that these pieces of meat used to be living people and treating them as such. Even so, he ends up burying the meat on a nondescript beach with marked gravestones. And I can't help but wonder what it would look like to have some random family of beachgoers have their vacation turned horrifying when a curious little kid with a plastic shovel unearths what amounts to a bunch of mutilated corpses. We then get more Haru and Legoshi development, and honestly it's really nice to see Leg being open and honest with her now. It's a great way of showing how he's developed over the course of the first season, so it's a shame to see that she's upset that they aren't spending as much time together anymore due to Leg's training, which, fair enough. She doesn't agree with his logic of doing all this training for her, and it's a believable conflict that's presented. What's not believable is how Leg's solution is that they should jump straight to getting married. Okay, sure, nice. Haru takes this so well that she immediately leaves. Smooth as sandpaper, Leg. This anime has a strange mix of believable character interactions, yet decision-making that is anything but. Haru and Leg's relationship is for the most part believable when you put aside all the weird devouring fetish stuff with Haru wanting to climb in his mouth last season. Next episode, we finally discover the identity of Tem's murderer, Riz. Leg confronts the bear about it, but before things get hostile, we have none other than Peanut, probably the most insufferable character of the series so far. Peanut is strangely dismissive of the entire thing and doesn't even react until Leg demands if he heard anything. Now, two people know Riz is guilty, and Riz wants to kill them both. But Peanut says that if Riz kills him, the police will actually start investigating. I'm sorry, what? Do the police just not care if only one person dies? They'll only bother to investigate a fucking murder when at least two people die? What kind of sham of law enforcement is this? Not only that, but Peanut says he won't turn Riz in because it's a complicated situation between the three of them, and that he just considers justice to have been served for the day. How the fuck? In what way has justice been served? Tem's killer is literally right in front of you, and you're happy that he's just gonna have insomnia now? Sure, Peanut claims to be indifferent about the whole thing, but Leg doesn't say anything to it either. Peanut just tells him, oh, it's time to go, and he's like, I'm out. We really don't get much explanation until later as to why Leg doesn't just call the police. Apparently, Leg has some kind of Zuko level of honor obsession that makes him think that he has to deal with Riz himself. At least this is what he tells Dear Boy later in the season. He's being responsible for his strength. Yeah, I don't buy it. The only responsible thing to do in this scenario is turn him over to the police. So, of course, if he's going to take on Riz himself, he needs more training. And he gets that by having Goheen teach him how to fight meat-addicted carnivores so he can capture and rehabilitate them. Pretty cool, honestly. We get some more incredible fight choreography from it as Batman Legoshi helps to fight crime. Haru and Juno talk for a bit, and an alligator dude has his dick and balls cut off so an old goat man can have his wife back or something, and Louis wants to watch it because of course he does. We then have this cut to a giant neon sign that says Black Market written in Chinese. I think that this is a wonderful time to talk about how strangely accessible the black market is in this world. I get that finding a drug dealer to sell weed or something of this sort isn't the hardest thing to do in the real world, even as a high school student, but it's just so casual in this anime. This stuff is illegal. You'd think they want to be covert about it, but they're proudly putting up neon signs and telling anyone to come and go as they please. Maybe the law enforcement in this world really is just unbelievably incompetent, because they're about as good at shutting down illicit meat trades as they are investigating murders in this anime. We get some more Batman Legoshi before he ends up being caught by the shishigumi for stealing elephant tusks from them or something, and he finds out that Louis is their new boss, and tells him that he's found the murderer before promptly jumping off a balcony. As the season draws to a close, the anime starts to focus more on building up to the inevitable fight between Legoshi and Riz, and we get to see more of the Big Bear's weird justification for eating Tem. He goes into detail about seeing this literal act of brutal murder as a means to immortalize their friendship or something and keep Tem forever as a part of him. Oh boy, someone sure has a vor fetish. It makes absolutely no sense for him to believe this because he more or less ignores the fact that, he fucking murdered Tem. He thinks Tem still views him as his friend, which is bizarre when you take into account the fact that, well, for one, he's fucking dead, so he doesn't view anyone as anything anymore. And two, you subjected him to one of the most horrifying and bloody deaths possible. No, he would not view you as his friend, you beady-eyed walnut of a character. The only way that I can believe this is if I tell myself that he just simply doesn't know any better, which at that point, he'd have to be so fucking dumb that he would still be in elementary school. Anyway, Riz proceeds to threaten Peanut by sucking on his finger before we have a nice pre-game fight between Leg and Riz in a shower room. Once again, amazingly choreographed scene. It's incredibly visceral and not afraid to show it, which I like. My only problems with the scene are, one, hearing more of Riz's horrible justification, though of course the Leg is quick to point out how wrong he is. The bigger problem with this scene is that there's this beaver lady who's cleaning the place and interrupts. Obviously the carnivores have to drop the fight midway through, and it's played as this sort of comedic moment where Riz gets his innocent face back on again while he talks to her and everything. It's amusing, but it's such an odd tonal shift in my opinion. But regardless, it postpones their fight to New Year's Eve. Season 2, Episode 11, Scattered Scales. Oh boy. Let me just read you the description Netflix gives for this episode. To grow stronger for his New Year's Day confrontation with Riz, Legoshi tries ingesting a moth larva and has an intense hallucination. And this is the thumbnail to go along with it. I had trouble conjuring up the willpower to press play after reading this. I'll be honest, these last 2 episodes of the season are what finally broke me into making this review. The way the story goes is just... okay. Let's take this one step at a time. Leg eats a moth grub. He does this with surprisingly little hesitation. Yeah, of course he doesn't want to eat something living, but in the first season it's mentioned that Leg has a fondness for bugs. He even has a pet rhinoceros beetle in season 1 that he cares for. Unfortunately, the writers seem to have forgotten all about that. They had the beetle die and Leg never acknowledges it, and his aversion to eating the larva isn't anything more than a natural aversion to taking a life. Nothing about feeling bad about it being a bug. Regardless, when he eats it, he starts tripping balls. He's greeted by a giant moth figure that basically says that if Leg is going to eat someone, then they need to respect their life in doing so. This is oddly similar to something from the book series Guardians of Ga'Hoole, a series which I hold dear to my heart. Later in this book series, there's these direwolves that practice a ceremony called Lochinver. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I think it might translate to something like locked gaze or something similar. Basically, when the direwolves bring down a caribou or elk or whatever to eat, they pause before making the killing blow, and the hunt leader locks eyes with their prey. There's this silent exchange where the wolves accept and respect that this animal is giving its life to sustain them, and the prey in turn respects that this is something that the wolves must do to survive. As weird as this scene in Beastars is, the whole idea of accepting the importance of a prey animal's life as it essentially becomes a part of you sorta makes sense. Guess they just needed a giant talking moth to get the point across. After recovering from his tripping balls, Leg goes to see Louie again, though his fur's grown back by this time and the Shishigumi would recognize him as he is, so he decides to meet Louie at a bar while cross-dressing. Crossed another kink off the list, I guess. Not kidding either, the Japanese version has Leg literally say that he's a bad cross-dresser. He tells Louie about the fight and asks for the deer to be there and watch. Louie says fuck off and Leg leaves. We then get a scene where Peanut is seemingly eaten by Riz, and I couldn't help but feel grateful to have the annoying playboy gone for once. As the fight draws near, Louie realizes he's gay. Only for carnivores though. It's Leg. I'm saying that he's gay for Leg. Maybe the cross-dressing got to him. I don't know. Regardless, he decides to show up for the fight, but he needs to leave the Shishigumi in order to do so because he believes it'll send the wrong message if he doesn't. Not sure exactly how that works. I think Leg was fine with you watching as a mafia leader. He didn't say anything about it when he asked you to be there, and he obviously knew full well that you were in fact the Shishigumi boss. I can't figure out where he got this notion from, but it causes some extra tension as Lion Daddy drives Louie to the fight. As they enter a tunnel, Lion Daddy shuts off the car and basically gives Louie the choice to either shoot him or be devoured. Louie can't bring himself to shoot, but lucky for him, another Shishigumi lion named Free comes out of nowhere to shoot Lion Daddy himself, saving Louie and allowing him to get to the fight and live. There's a few problems I have with this. For one, it makes no sense why anyone in the Shishigumi would have any reason not to have killed Louie on the spot when he stated that he was leaving. Sure, Lion Daddy cares about him, but he's the one who ends up trying to devour him anyway, so he can't leave with the Shishigumi's secrets or whatever. If that's the reason why he wants to devour him, then why the hell would Free want to save Louie's life? Wouldn't he think the same? The reason Free had this gun in the first place was that Lion Daddy gave it to him several episodes back, instructing Free to shoot him if he ever tried to devour Louie. Okay, sure, but why would you tell this to Free, who very explicitly said that he wanted to eat Louie just a few episodes prior to that? You weren't the problem until Louie decided to leave, at which point he's not your boss anymore, and he's only a liability if we're to believe the whole revealing the Shishigumi secrets thing, his reason for trying to devour Louie in the tunnel in the first place. Back at the fight, Peanut is unfortunately alive, merely tied up and lightly wounded so Riz could try and send Leg into a fit of rage because he wants a no-holds-barred fight. Leg proceeds to get his ass kicked until he mentions that respect for life is the only thing that matters, alluding to what he learned after tripping on moth grubs. Apparently, having respect for life allows Leg to somehow turn into a swarm of glowing moth things and teleport above Riz, which surprises him enough that Leg is able to get the upper hand on him. For about 2 seconds before Riz just grabs him and proceeds to beat the shit out of him some more. Okay, cool. Don't know how the moth teleporting powers came in, but they're clearly not doing shit for Leg anyway, so I can't be bothered. Then Riz admits that all the friendship through devouring shit was just a lie and he knew it was just a mindless killing. Okay, I guess he was just really good at lying to himself or putting up an act for it, and for some reason, only now is he willing to admit it. This tickles Leg's fancy, so he poses like one of your French girls and asks for the bear to tell him more. They talk about it for a bit before Louie shows up. He and Leg escape for a moment while Peanut breaks free of his bonds and presumably calls the police. We then get the most whack job scene of the season. We see Louie admitting to himself that he cares for Legoshi, and we get to watch in real time as he's struggling to keep up this aura of indifference before breaking down and crying. It's harrowing to see this because the viewer realizes that the entire time, this is what Louie has been struggling with in his head. This part of the scene is actually fantastic, so it fucking sucks when the show remembers its devouring kink and Louie tells Leg to eat him. Great! Apparently, eating him will make Leg stronger so he can win the fight. Of course, Leg is reluctant to do so, but eventually agrees under the condition that he's eating Louie because he wants to. Turns out he only eats Louie's leg, but that's more than enough for Legoshi to become swole as shit and continue the fight with Riz. Unfortunately, it only lasts a few seconds before midnight strikes, and Riz decides, nah man, it's fine, you win. Then they're both arrested, but Leg is released shortly after. During a brief break with Leg and Haru later during the credits, Leg says he's quitting school and that's the end of the season. I don't even know where to begin with this finale. I get the whole symbolism of Leg eating Louie's foot with a number branded on it to show he's lifting that curse, but as far as Leg's character goes, this fight just invalidates so much of what he'd worked for over the season. His physical training didn't mean anything because he's clearly still too weak to match Riz, and his mental training to resist eating meat doesn't mean anything either because he ends up eating Louie's leg anyway because that's the only option if he wants to win, so what was the point? Leg is fighting tooth and nail through this season to prove that carnivores don't have to eat meat, yet that's all thrown out the window in one scene. The whole respect for life deal was interesting, but all it amounted to in the fight was Leg getting to teleport with moth powers, and that doesn't even help despite being nonsensical. Not only that, but Riz just decides to say Leg wins after seeing how touching it is that Leg ate Louie's foot, and the police, the goddamn police, are the ones to come in and end it, as if we haven't been practically ignoring the police this whole season. If your main villain just ends up getting arrested and jailed anyway, what's the point of not calling the police in the first place? Why couldn't we have had something where Leg still has to eat Louie's foot, but this time he's actually able to beat Riz because of it? As it is, there's no point from Legoshi's perspective to eat Louie because the strength it gave him didn't even let him win the fight. If he and Louie had just stayed up on that platform and waited for the police to arrive, Riz would have still been arrested. Let the foot eating matter if you're gonna go that far. Maybe Riz could have been beaten down, and in a frenzy, Legoshi might be moments away from dealing the killing blow, but he stops and has a flashback to the moth and remembers the respect for life, so he lets Riz live and leaves him to the police when they arrive. That would have been a hell of a lot better at tying in the whole respect for life plot without having random butterfly teleporting. It's such a bizarre way to end off the season, though I guess Louie's only going to be more gay for Leg now that he finally got devoured like he was wanting. Shame Leg had to tease him and stop at the foot though. This season is far from being all bad. I don't want to give that impression. I think that the technical aspect of the 3D to pseudo 2D look is amazing to watch, and we actually did get to see some 2D animation in this season too. most notably during the headmaster meeting. The music is great, and I found myself head bobbing every time I heard the Season 2 OP while watching the series again for this video, and the fight choreography is just as stunning as the voice acting. It's the story's fascination with sexualizing everything that drives me up the wall. Beastars has pretty much become known as the furry anime, and I don't think it helps things to only further reinforce the stereotype of fetish culture that this internet subculture already has. Snake Lady was just a plot device to set things in motion for the season, and even she had a whole bunch of sexualization thrown in the scene that introduced her. If less time had been spent on shoving in every single fetish the writers could get away with, I can't help but feel that some of the dropped plot points could have been picked up on. The subplot with Tao and Kibi was actually really touching and heartwarming to see when it was brought to a close and Kibi asked Tao to touch his hand after having it reattached in the hospital. Why couldn't we have more of that? Have Legoshi actually notice the death of his beloved pet, maybe tie that into the respect for life. It's staggering to see how drastically things shifted from the first to second season, and I can't help but feel bad for the people who got hooked on the high school drama murder mystery aspect. Oh, you liked that part of the first season? Well, sorry, now a 17-year-old wolf is beating up the mafia and making a friendly bear feel bad because he shared his vor kink with an alpaca. All I can hope is that the third season tries to tone back the sexualization and maybe revisit some of the things that were dropped. Like, will Leg become the Beastar now that it's presumably public knowledge that he found the murderer, like the mouse dude said in the meeting? If the third season somehow finds a way to make the school scene relevant again, I'll be more interested, though I'm not holding my breath. Hey there, if you made it to the end of this video, thanks for watching. I know reviews like this aren't exactly something I've done on this channel, though I did have a lot of fun making this video. If you enjoyed it or have your own thoughts on the second season, I'd love to see what you think in the comments. Who knows, I might make reviews into a more regular thing if you really enjoyed it. Again, thanks for watching and have a nice day.